everybody.
That's what she said. She remembered the name.
Thank you for coming. If you haven't had a chance to fill out a raffle ticket for the door prize, please do so now. My name is Dumuhosky. I'm the Media Services Librarian here, and I'm taking over the program from Sam Stryker, our interim director. Again, thanks for coming. Today, we have Rob Dumo. Who's really Rob Dumuhosky? There's no nepotism involved here. He's a Batavia native, and he's been working in comics for nearly 20 years. He's worked for publishers like Zenescope. Am I saying that?
Yeah.
Okay. Zenescope Entertainment, Broken Icon Comics, and writers like Daniel Way, who's best known for his long-run writing Marvel's Deadpool. Along with drawing many titles for Broken Icon Comics, he also serves as art director. Outside of comics, he's also an award-winning caricature artist and freelance illustrator. If you get a chance to book him for a party, it's well worth it. It's pretty great. And chances are you've seen his work somewhere around Western New York and not even known it. So check out Rob's artwork on www.robdumoart.com or at @robdumo on various social medias. And without further ado, he is going to be reviewing Watchmen and also talking a little bit about the industry.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so Watchmen, I first read probably in my late teens, early 20s. It was given to me by my boss at the time, who was also a big comics guy. And he knew I was into comics. And I'd mostly just read, like, you know, your normal superhero stuff like X-Men and things like that. And he actually gave me his personal copy of Watchmen and said, you know, if you're really into comics, you have to read this book. And it definitely changed the way I looked at, like, what comics could do and what comics could be with, like, superheroes. So, Watchmen is written by Alan Moore, and he is a British occultist, anarchist, and a ceremonial magician. So he's kind of a weird dude. He did some other books, like From Hell, which is about Jack the Ripper, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, V for Vendetta, and all of those were turned into movies along with Watchmen, which he wants absolutely nothing to do with. He hates the fact that his comics have been turned into movies because he basically sees it as an impossibility for comics to be faithfully adapted into film. In fact, when Watchmen was made, he absolutely refused to receive any of the money made by it, which would have been in the millions. That's how staunch he is about his opinions on things. So now, he didn't draw Watchmen, though he did do some cartooning in his early days of comics. Dave Gibbons is the artist for Watchmen, and he's also a British artist and a letterer, so it means he also did the word bubbles and letters and stuff in the book. And his style of lettering in that book actually contributed to the creation of the Comic Sans font that you see. He worked on books like Doctor Who, Green Lantern, Superman, and he actually liked the Watchmen movie. He thought it was about as good as they could get, aside from, you know, some other, things. And they actually had a colorist who worked on it too, so a different guy did all the colors. His name is John Higgins. He worked with Alan Moore also on a Batman book called The Killing Joke, and he worked on Judge Dredd for like 20 years, which you've probably heard of the Judge Dredd movies. So yeah, like comics as stories are told in collaboration. You know, there's usually lots of people who have their hands in it, in the creation of it. unlike a lot of the, more independent books that were a part of this series, like, Mouse and those where, like, one person did the entire book. When we're talking about mainstream books, it's usually a team of people working together. And even the artist, has some input on the way the story is told. They're not just like blindly following, whatever the writer says, So they really work as a creative team and like bouncing ideas off of each other to make sure that the final product is a good one. So this is an example of kind of like what a normal script would look like. This is one from a book that I worked on called Revenge of the Dragon. So it's very simple. It kind of looks like a movie script. You usually don't see any of this stuff in the book. You see just little captions and stuff like that, like they might say. So it's like page 1, flashback to 1476, establishing shot outside a battle outside Bucharest, and then caption, Bucharest, 1476. So that's the lettering that you would see, the part you actually read in the book. And then it's just got like, some very small scenes of like, oh, there's fighting going on and this stuff, like it's very to the point. That's the whole page right there. And that's what I get to work from as an artist. So the artist in a script like this has to do a lot of heavy lifting, as far as like camera shots and things like that, pacing to make sure that the story is told in a cohesive manner so that the reader understands what's happening and that we're getting all the details that we need to understand the story and so that it's, exciting. Alan Moore is much more descriptive in his scripts. And so this begins with page 1, and this whole page is just the first panel. So he gets very down to details. Like he thinks about absolutely everything, and he is putting it all out there for his artist. And some of the wording that he uses is very. It's like he's writing prose. He's writing a novel for his artist to interpret, and he's giving you all of this, pretty language and stuff, which most comic book writers don't really bother with, and you can see in these highlighted spots that's basically where I think Dave Gibbons, is like, this is this stuff that I really need, to like worry about when I'm like looking at this. So like this goes on. We got panel 2 and panel 3 and panel 4 and panel 5 and 6 and 7. And like so later in the script he does dial it down a little bit, but for the most part he's pretty wordy. And unfortunately as the reader you don't really get all of those words, which are really, it's great descriptors and stuff, but you couldn't possibly fit that on the page with, and be able to see any artwork whatsoever. So the artist has to come in and interpret that so that you guys can all see it as a reader. So you can see kind of like a little bit of a rough of what he came to with the first page right here on the left side. But basically that's what it ended up being. So there's not a lot of text in there compared to, those, I think it was like 5 pages of description that he, put in there that actually made it to it. But it all very descriptively showed what Dave Gibbons had to draw to like show us what's happening in this book. And so Watchmen was, so he also, like, they kind of stuck to this 9-panel grid. which they had decided was probably the best way for the story to flow, for pacing and dramatic effect. There are parts like we saw in the previous page where like he combines a few panels to create one for like more impact. But for the most part, it's all gridded out like this, which means that you have to really vary the camera angles up in order to make it interesting. So what we're seeing, the first three across would be the page on your left, and the other three is your page on your right. But we've got lots of, I did not want to do that. But we've got lots of different camera angles here. You know, we've got like behind Dr. Manhattan, the blue guy here, and then we're looking above them, and then we've got a close-up, we've got over the shoulder, and we can't see him at all. We've got like some middle ground stuff happening. Then we've got like some silhouetting, all sorts of different angles to help make it more engaging. And they also used this, you know, more of a flat coloring technique, which is more of a European thing at the time. I guess Alan Moore didn't like the airbrushed look of a lot of American comics. So that's another aspect. So Watchmen came out in 1986 from DC Comics, and it was actually made Time's 100 Best Novels of 2005. And it was the only comic on that list. It's viewed by many as like one of the best ever comics that's out there, and many say it started to show a more grown-up look at superheroes, which you know, was also aided by The Dark Knight Returns, which was a Batman book that came out like the same year by Frank Miller. It's actually based on a bunch of characters from the Charlton Comics, which was a company that was acquired by DC Comics. And when Alan Moore came forth with this proposal for this book, they said that they wanted him to change the characters because the outcome of this story would mean that they couldn't really use them again anywhere else. It would like change them so dramatically that they wouldn't be usable for the foreseeable future. So they wanted him to make up all brand new characters for this. So all of the characters were kind of based off of these Charlton characters, just like little tweaks and stuff to make them, you know, his own. And so it takes place in the 1980s, where costume heroes have been around since like the 40s, and it's a real world kind of interpretation. As we are getting into the story, the United States is in Cold War with the USSR, the Soviet Union. So it reflects, you know, the times of a real world, but as if we actually had costumed heroes in it. So the one thing about like all these costumed heroes is that none of them actually have any powers except for one character, who's Dr. Manhattan. And Dr. Manhattan, he has the ability to basically manipulate matter and all sorts of things. He's like very godlike powers. So he actually earns his powers like more back into like the 50s and stuff like that. And he totally changes the way the world around him, basically, just by being. So we see these flashbacks into like the 60s and stuff, and the Vietnam era, and Dr. Manhattan was utilized by the government to help them win Vietnam. So, you know, so it's a world where we win the Vietnam War easily. because we have this power of Dr. Manhattan to help us. And so Nixon stays as president, and they get rid of limits on term limits, and so Nixon is still president into the 80s.
That is a horror story.
So it's what could have happened, you know, if you had, you know, this type of power behind you. But it gives us a different reason for the Cold War tensions. You know, the reason behind it now is that everyone's afraid of the U.S. because they've got Dr. Manhattan, and so they have to ramp up their nuclear capabilities to have a possible chance to fight against the U.S. should the U.S. try to, you know, be an aggressor in some way. And so because of that, shows us at the end of like each issue of the book, this clock, this countdown to doomsday. And at the end of each issue, we get closer and closer to midnight, which would be, you know, mutually assured destruction through, you know, nuclear war. And that continues throughout the book. So the book starts off, and actually in the 80s also, by 1977 they had outlawed vigilantes. So all the heroes have basically retired, you know, except for one character who goes by the name of Rorschach. And he is so devoted to fighting against, you know, crime and injustice or whatever that he still continues to do it as an outlaw. And the only others are the comedian who works with the government and Dr. Manhattan who still works with the government. But the book starts out with the murder of the comedian. So he's been killed, and Rorschach figures this out and decides that somebody is probably going after the superheroes. So that is what basically drives the whole book. You know, so we have this murder of a hero, and Rorschach needs to find out who the culprit is. So he goes and he tries to warn all of the other like past superheroes to make sure that they know that they're on the lookout. You know, somebody might be going after them. At the same time, rumors start spreading about Dr. Manhattan, that people who've come into contact with him may have contracted cancer because of his, you know, atomic powers and stuff like that. So he ends up exiling himself to Mars. So we've got this big mystery that's happening through the book. And we get to learn a lot about like all of the characters through like flashbacks and all sorts of like other instances like this one right here up on the screen. At the end of every book, we have these kind of prose editions, you know, where there's little excerpts of different things within the world, you know. So it's something like kind of totally different from like what most comics will do, you know. So this one on the screen is from Under the Hood, and it's basically the biography of one of the former heroes. And so we get all of these like extras at the end of some of these chapters that give us more of an idea of who these characters are and background of this world. So it really fleshes it out and creates a much more believable kind of idea of what this is, other than just a bunch of people in tights running around beating people up, you know. It shows us that these characters have a lot more to them than just that. They're very human people with lots of flaws like anybody else. You know, they're not just like your golden boy Superman who can do no wrong. You know, some of these people have deep-seated traumas, or they're actually really terrible people on the inside, despite, you know, the fighting that they do for good causes. So we've got all sorts of this background and stuff. And this guy is Hollis Mason, so he was one of the original like heroes from like the 40s who went under the name Night Owl, and eventually ended up moving that onto another hero took up that mantle and became Night Owl. So then we've got like other, you know, excerpts from like magazines or newspapers, you know, talking about, you know, the heroes and stuff like that.
And this is all part of the book?
Yeah, this is all part of the book. So at the end of each issue, we have these little excerpts of like different parts that flesh out the world and give us a lot more like background on everything that's happening that you can't necessarily give all like in the pages of the comic, where you know, you have to have pictures telling your story and stuff like this. But they're all like realistically kind of, you know, shown. Like this is these are like psychiatric evaluations of, you know, one of our characters, you know, from a hospital. And, you know, they've got it right down to like coffee stains on the paper and paper clips holding, you know,
Yeah.
just pieces to it, you know, as if you had actually just opened up a folder. Yeah.
Now, does it work best to wait to the end to read this stuff, or like maybe as you get interested to skip to it? Or?
I don't know. I suppose some of them, I mean, I think they're strategically planned as to where they are in the book,
Okay.
you know, so.
Oh, I thought they were all at the end.
So Watchmen was originally put out as single issue comics. So that would be like 22-ish pages generally. At the end of like your first 22 pages, that's basically like a chapter.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and so you've got like the normal comic with, you know, all your pictures and stuff like that, and at the end of that first chapter, then you would have one of these.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool.
And one of these areas tells you more about the part that you just read, and it gives you background on, you know, some of those characters. If you were to jump ahead in some of the chapters and read some of these, it might kind of give away some of what you had maybe like not learned about these characters
Okay.
yet. So don't go into these too much if you don't want spoilers. So the other thing that we have is a comic within a comic, which is very interesting too. We have a character who's just like a kid, you know, on the street, you know, by a newsstand reading a comic while all of this is going on too. And he is reading a pirate comic because, I mean, they've got superheroes in the world. Why would you be reading about superheroes, you know? So they decided to make it a pirate comic, so it was something completely different, something that they would actually fantasize, you know, about, rather than the stuff they got in front of them. But, so the comic is like the Tales of the Black Freighter, and it actually mirrors many of the events that are actually happening in the comic to the heroes, right down to even some of the panels. So if you see like this last panel of the guy eating, I think it's a seagull. So we move to the next panel on the next page of one of our guys eating a chicken wing. But we get little bits of the Black Freighter throughout the book as the story progresses, and it just kind of mirrors some of the things that are going on in the story of Watchmen, only is told from this character in the Black Freighter. So we've got like all of this extra stuff happening. We've got all these people and their problems and things like that, and they're really trying to figure out what is happening with this. And it turns out to be a larger conspiracy with world-altering consequences that they have to solve. And it's got quite the shocking revelation of like the villain and their intentions at the end of this book, which I don't want to ruin for you. And I don't want to ruin a lot of the stuff in this because it would just take away all of the impact of it. There are lots of reveals about who these characters are and their pasts and how it all relates to the final moment where like everything comes together. If I got too in-depth into the details, wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable as if you actually read the entire book. So I would say, like, if you are looking to kind of change your mind about like what your ideas are about the superhero genre and what comics can be, and like whether or not they're for adults and things like that, I would highly suggest picking up this book. As long as you're not, it's not for the faint of heart, I would say. There's a lot of violence, there's, some, controversial issues that comes up, there's a little bit of nudity. It's not anything explicit or anything, but it's very adult, I think Watchmen the movie is also, like, it's rated R. So it's definitely a rated R comic.
Cool.
Does anybody have any questions about it?
This one might be weird, but it's from what you said originally, how they set it up for 9 panels for readability and layout. Has this been translated into other languages?
I gotta imagine it has been. Because it was actually a very popular book, too. It sold like crazy. And, I mean, it came out in the 80s, so, like, it's had multiple redos of publication. I believe there's, like, an ultimate edition that's out that has, like, those pages of script that I showed you in the beginning, which wasn't initially part of the book. But typically, when a book sells well for one of the major publishers, they will do translations and they sell them abroad, depending on that country's, I suppose standards for like what they would do. This probably wouldn't fly in some countries.
And I guess that's where I was steering. In some of the Asian countries, it's right to left and different.
Yeah.
So I wondered how that layout might change.
Yeah. If you're reading manga, they read the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And so actually, when they bring over some of the manga to the U.S., they actually mirror it for U.S. readers, which can change the artwork and can possibly alter the way things look or are read. And it's not always like the best flow.
Right.
So they might change that in some ways if they think that it'll still be a good enough translation that way. Or in some instances they're like, this has to stay left to right because otherwise it wouldn't work, and it's up to the reader to adjust to that.
When you started with what they give you, one is just a basic Budapest 14, whatever, and the other one was a huge amount of
Yeah.
information. Although you get all that information, which is more challenging, I would imagine getting nothing and you have to create that.
Yeah, it's a lot more challenging as an artist to have less information. Actually, back in the early days of Marvel, they had what they called like the Marvel method of script writing. So Stan Lee would basically just write a short kind of paragraph of what he wanted to be included in the first page. And guys like, Steve Ditko or, some of the other artists at the time were basically writing the comic. Like they weren't even given dialogue for what the characters were saying or anything. So they're just as much co-writers in that sense as Stan Lee was. Kirby's the other guy. Jack Kirby basically wrote a lot of Stan Lee's books for him, essentially, because Stan Lee would go in after he saw like the artwork and decide what the characters were saying. So Kirby had to decide like some of the emotions and things like that, that might be conveyed by a character in a particular situation, and then Stan would be like, "Oh yeah, this makes sense for them to say here." So it was very bare bones for him. But personally, I like a script that's a little more detailed because then I don't have to do as much research. Especially if we're talking about something that's supposed to be like kind of historical, like that Revenge of the Damned. It's like going back to like Vlad the Impaler and stuff. Who's a real historical figure fighting the Ottomans, and so like I've got to look up what Ottoman armor looked like during the time, and what Bucharest would have looked like during that era, and the type of houses and stuff that they would have, any like the specific castle of Vlad the Impaler, that he had at that time, so that the stuff is accurate and believable. Because otherwise, somebody's going to come at us and be like, "This is not the right kind of sword," like.
What are you writing?
Some historian will come out and be like, no. Yeah.
So Alan Morgan wrote this? Alan Moore wrote this, right?
Yeah.
But who is the artist, or is it a group of artists who do all the drawing?
So Dave Gibbons was the artist. So he did like the line work, all of the line work. So he would do pencils and then inks himself. And he also did the lettering on the book. But John Higgins was the colorist, so he would come in afterwards and do all the colors on the book.
Is that typical? I'm sorry.
Yeah, pretty typical of more of like the mainstream comics. It's a very kind of assembly line, especially when you're working on a monthly book. So these individual issues would have come out each month, which means generally they give themselves a head start so that they're not trying to do 22 pages in a month. But generally, yeah, you would have the script done, for the artist, because the art is like the thing that takes the longest. And so you would have just a penciler in a lot of ways, and he would pencil, the pages, and as he finishes a page, he would send them into the editor, and the editor would, decide if there need to be any changes to anything, or if they think it looks good, and then they send it to an inker, and the inker will go and put, actual ink over the lines to finalize the drawing, and then the inker will send it to the colorist, and the colorist does the colors, and then a letterer comes in and does letters over the top of all of that stuff. And so that they're all working at the same time while the penciler's working on the next pages, and not having to do all of that extra work to get that first page done. Which is why it's a lot harder for some of these guys to do everything themselves. It takes a lot longer for them to produce a book.
Yeah.
But this way they can put it out on a semi-regular basis and hopefully get it done. they did almost like run into some problems with keeping up with this book because I think Alan Moore had originally pitched it as like a 6-issue book, and so he didn't really have a full 12 planned out, and so he kind of had to write it as Dave Gibbons was drawing it, and eventually Dave would catch up to him and have to be like, give me some more pages, you know, we gotta move this along or we're gonna miss our deadline.
Did the artists have any say in those millions of dollars given up by the author for the movie production?
You know, I'm not sure if Dave Gibbons got money for it. I imagine he probably did. Because he was less of a hard ass, I guess, is like Alan Moore is, you know. And they had previously gotten money for like some of the other books that were made. So Alan Moore took money for like V for Vendetta and some of the other ones, but he was just so put off by like how they came out, or I don't think he actually watched the movie, but he'd seen parts of it, that he decided, like, nah, I just don't want it.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to think that I'm okay with it.
Yeah. One other question. Has AI infiltrated the creation of these books?
Yeah, a little bit. I remember a lot of people kind of experimenting with Midjourney when it first came out, and like trying to have that write a draw a comic book for them. You know, basically writers who can't draw but wanted to make a book and didn't want to put all the money towards paying an artist, which can be quite a lot. You know, it's a labor-intensive process, and if you're going to get somebody who's good, you got to put some money behind it. And if you're just like a writer trying to make a book, you can't do that in comics without putting some money out there unless you get a publisher to do it for you. So there were mixed results. You know, a lot of AI is, it's harder for the untrained eye to see the flaws in it. It looks pretty in a lot of ways, but you know, there are lots of mistakes that it makes as far as like lighting or like still like hands, which have extra fingers and things like that. It can't do lettering accurately. You know, there was a cover artist for DC who got nailed on using some AI, who did like a Superman image where like the logo was all messed up, which was a clear giveaway that AI was involved. So most big companies are trying to stay away from it and trying to clamp down on it, but it's getting better and better at doing what it does, and harder to notice in some ways. But there are lots of like independent writers who like the idea of not having to shell out extra bucks for an artist, and I'm sure there are books out there that they've produced that are completely AI. You had a question.
Yeah, it seems unusual to me, but maybe that they're doing so the first parts of the book are, or you know, it's a segment, but they're finalized before the ending is done. Like I would think, typically with a book, maybe they might change something in the beginning because they came up with an idea later on that didn't work with something that was already written. Is that because of something specific to the superhero?
So you're thinking like story-wise and
Right.
I mean, there are certainly like drafts that, you know, writers will go through.
So they've got the basics of it.
Before they've gotten to that point.
Okay.
Yeah, so they would, like, even though he had only planned it for 6 issues, I think he probably had the overarching story figured out and just had to fill in some extra stuff. And so you're getting some of that in like the psychiatry excerpts and like the biography of Hollis Mason. Those things wouldn't have originally probably been included in the script, and he had to add those things to extend the size of the book and the scope of the story. I think every now and then they might go back and be like, oh, this is wrong, we need to change this, real quick before publication. But usually they've got a pretty good idea of like the beginning of the story and how it needs to be before it actually gets to print.
Do you think that this book is, that the characters are based on real people, some of them?
I'm sure that there's a possibility. I think, any creator or writer, they draw from their own experiences. There are probably personality aspects that might be in people that Alan Moore knows or has come across, or just stories that he's heard from like other like real life events or things. Especially because he wants these characters to feel real, to have these real problems and real emotions and things. So they experience very real things that happen to people. You see a lot of the background throughout the book on these characters are things that you've probably heard happened to other people, and so it can be relatable on that level. Whether or not he had a specific person in mind, you would have to ask him. But I'm sure that they probably are. Trying to think if there is anyone in particular who might have been. Obviously Nixon's a real person.
Yes.
But even as an artist too, like I often will steal the faces of people I know for characters, whether or not they're just background characters, or I need to come up with something that doesn't look completely generic. Just draw friends of mine or family in there. I think I've drawn more probably before. Yeah.
Do you have any of comics or artwork in magazines or anything that's been published? Have you ever done a comic book?
Yeah,
And had it
I
published?
might actually have some on here. Let's see. So these are some pages from my Robin Hood book that I did for Zetascope. So this is a reimagining of Robin Hood. So she's a female Robin Hood. Zetascope does a lot of reimaginings of like great fairy tales and stuff like that. So this is like her meeting with Little John.
Did you go to?
So these are just the pencils that they actually went straight from pencils to color in this book. So a colorist later came in and did colors over this, and then a letterer came in and put word balloons and stuff in later on too. Oh, and they made me switch that one. So this book, I had actually come in to spell the artist on the main series because he was going too slow to be able to keep up with the deadline. So I had to come in issue 3 and basically give him a break so they could stay on schedule. At the time that I was drawing this issue, they hadn't even published the first issue yet. And so all I had to go from was cover art of the character of Robin Hood in her costume. And the cover artist had drawn her as a lefty, I think. And so I drew her as a lefty. But after I got a few pages in there, like, she needs to be right-handed. And I was like, well, we haven't even seen her shoot her bow yet. Like, this is the first time we see her in costume. So I had to go and like change a bunch of panels to make sure that it was depicted.
So do you have a degree in artwork or psychology, or how do you train to do this?
So I have a degree in art. I have my associates in graphic design, and I have my bachelor's in fine art, drawing and painting. But while I was in school for fine art, I took some classes from some correspondence classes from the Joe Kubert School of Cartooning, which is basically a school for comic book artists.
Is there a degree for that school?
So it's a diploma. They're not an accredited college. It's more of like a tech school. I mean, I just took like some classes from there. So like I got, a paper that says I finished the classes that I took there. But I only have my degrees from like colleges. But there's, there's lots of books on it that you can learn from too. But there are, comic book classes you can take at some colleges. I taught a class on cartooning at RIT for a semester, in which I taught the students a lot about storytelling in comic books and stuff like that.
Did you ever publish your own comic book?
Yeah.
And what did that involve, from start to finish?
So like Laura said, I actually work a lot with this company called Broken Icon Comics, and I'm also their art director. So like I did my own book through them called Eccentrics, which is a superhero book. These are just a smattering of some pages. And basically it was like, hey, I've got this idea for a book. Can you guys publish it? I asked a writer friend of mine to take my ideas and turn it into a script because I wasn't confident in my own ability to write. He, definitely done some stuff. So I was like, these are the characters. He was like, let's do it. So we collaborated on it together and talked about the story that we wanted to tell.
Wow.
And I actually did all of the artwork in this, so I did the colors too and everything because I don't want to paint, but it's
It's similar to musicians. Sometimes they write the lyrics first and put the music to it, and then other times they write the music and find the lyrics.
Yeah, definitely. And you would collaborate with your bandmates sometimes, like Laura's husband is a drummer. And so like in their band practices that I was around for, like their singer would come with like some words that he wrote down for a song. They would play a beat that they thought that they, liked for the tone of it or whatever, and they would jam it out. And we would add in, some of those lyrics to fit the music to where, eventually they came up with a song. Yeah.
So here you've gotten completely away from the 9-panel.
Yeah, so that's something that Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore came to themselves that they wanted to do.
Okay.
Most comics aren't like that.
Okay.
I like to break the plane of panels sometimes and mix things up quite a bit to make things a little more visually engaging. And the style of comic storytelling has changed quite a bit over the years. So if you go back to the time of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, early on in comics, they were all a lot closer to comic strip format, where it's just plain boxes, squares, rectangles. Whereas now, like, you could run into any number of different, like, angled shapes and things like that that might, you know, help add to, like, the action or whatever.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, so this is like what my roughs like look at like before I ended up.
Because you don't realize everything that's involved in doing the basic work that you have. There's so many components to it.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So do you have hand drawing sketches, or are they all like CAD?
So this would be digital. This would be done digitally.
I'm just thinking of what the sketches of like Rembrandt or Da Vinci are worth. And
Oh, yeah.
their sketches might be worth.
Yeah, well, and so like a lot of artists still do things traditionally too, you know, so they might have thumbnails that they do on paper and, you know, then move that to a larger board where they would do the final drawing and stuff. And some guys hang on to those and they sell them, you know, and they can get you some extra money. You know, definitely like a lot of artists sell their original pages. You know, depending on the popularity of the book, it could be quite a bit. But yeah, so this is like one of those one that shows like angles and stuff. But I did this all digitally to save on time.